Hi everyone, it's Danelli here. This is the biggest block to learning and success. So I've been really tackling this sort of like educational crisis lately and really exploring it from different angles. I think wanted to talk a little bit more about what I think is personally one of the biggest blocks to learning and success that creates this sort of cycle of educational crisis within society and also within an individual's life. And, you know, I've been called crazy before for like looking at this from a different angle because so many of the colleges and universities in Southern California where I've worked at, they generally will approach working with BIPOC students through a cultural pedagogy lens, which means they focus on culture and they're really kind of aggressive, like against colonialization and the racist, you know, inheritance from colonialization and different um, basically different like systemic racist um like I think national events and like crises and whatnot. And personally, I do enjoy like teaching students through a culturally relevant pedagogy, but it's not my preferred one. So I tend to deviate a little bit from my colleagues, and I almost always have because I tend to approach it from a psychological or trauma-informed pedagogy. And I generally will focus on that being kind of like the frame of my pedagogy. And it's really informed how I look at working with certain demographics. I usually will use a structure that's informed by narratology, which means that I love to teach students how to um, express their thoughts and ideas through like journaling or what we would consider like bibliotherapy, which is essentially kind of like a branch off of both expressive arts therapy and educational psychology. And so now I've talked about this specific kind of approach and like combination of approaches in different videos or in the past by saying that a lot of these different pedagogies and philosophies and research tends to overlap quite a lot. So, and this wouldn't be necessarily obvious to a lot of students when they're dealing with instructors. But I like to be quite transparent because a lot of the times, if I'm myth busting or I'm tackling, certain controversial issues, I really need to set the frame for my argument and the way that I tend to approach things. So, with that, being said, I'm moving on to what it is not. Um, I don't think that the biggest blocks to learning and success are necessarily related to gatekeeping, structural and systemic racism, mental health, generational trauma, or poverty. And I'm going to be honest with you on why I don't think these are necessarily the biggest blocks. I think they're contributing factors. They are sometimes symptoms of other things, especially like the mental health. However, I don't know that this is like these are specifically the biggest blocks. With the gatekeeping in specific, I think that um, there is a lot of gatekeeping in the educational realm, but also in the professional realms that like affect learning and success. And there's two, I've actually explored this issue into different ways. We can get into we can approach the issue from our wounding and, you know, feel like people are not being transparent with the information. The truth is that there's a lot of people that have been miseducated and don't necessarily know what they should know and what they should to be teaching other students that is required, as that should be transparent. And so the gatekeeping often is not, it's not intentional. It's just because it's being hidden from lack of like knowledge and transparency, and really the people don't know that they should be making this more transparent. Yes, there are gatekeepers that are intentional with their gatekeeping because they think and approach opportunities as uh like they're approaching things from a scarcity mindset. So if they know and they are savvy and they are aware, they wouldn't want other people to have those same opportunities or to have a shot at, accessing those opportunities because of number of different reasons. Either they are acting out of low self-esteem and gatekeeping from a place of like scarcity mindset, envy, you name it. So the gatekeeping, it could not be, it doesn't necessarily mean it's intentional, but it also could be intentional. Um, so, when I've had to confront the gatekeeping myself, I can get into like approach it from a place of wounding and say, this is the reason why I'm not learning, or this is the reason why I'm not successful. I've heard so many students also express similar sentiments, but the truth is, this is not what the problem is, right? This is not why you're not learning, and this is not why you're not successful. Structural and systemic racism. Again, it's a very real thing. It exists. It's often harder for somebody to articulate why it is they think it's structural and systemic racism, and it requires a different kind of training in order to be able to spot it properly, and to be able to articulate why it is structural and systemic racism. And generally, especially with like a lot of the like weaponization of diversity that a lot of certain institutions and workplaces engage in, where diversity is being weaponized as a way to blur the lines and make the institution, the people, the structure, the workplace appear non-racist because diversity is being weaponized to not appear racist. A lot of individuals who don't have enough experience will say, well, they will invalidate their own experience by saying, yeah, but like there are some Black people at work, or there are some like brown people at work, so it can't be structural and systemic racism. No, like it can 100% be. Um, and it takes, a special kind of training to be able to spot it, not just pedagogical and educational, but also legal, to be able to realize that a system or a structure has been um, activated, and racism is like uh, the thing that's kind of like making the gears go, right? But that's also not what's blocking the learning and the success. It isn't mental health either. Um, and by mental health, I'm not just talking about like depression, or no, I'm talking about other like psychiatric issues. Um, that comes with a host of different like uh, issues. However, that's also not the block to learning and success. I think that it is part of it, and it definitely, mental health issues can have very physical consequences, even anxiety, which we often in not a lot of cultures want to minimize the physical effects of anxiety. It can be extremely debilitating. Depression can be debilitating, but oftentimes the people are just burnt out. A lot of times they are functioning from habit, like out of habit. They just continue to do what they have to do. So, like mental health issues and struggles are not necessarily the biggest block to learning and success. Um, Generational trauma, it's a big one. Not to minimize this because this is a huge function of, why people struggle so much. But I think that again, generational trauma when you're trying to achieve a goal requires you to acknowledge that you are taking over responsibility for your own healing and the wounds that you inherited from that generational trauma, and that requires a level of responsibility. So we cannot use that as an excuse why the learning can't happen or the success can't happen. And that also includes poverty, right? So money is not the biggest block to learning and to success. There are a lot of incredibly successful people out there that are not the wealthiest. Money in your bank should not be your I personally, it should not be the deciding factor whether you are successful or not. I believe that, it is just one factor amongst a lot of different things. And also money and like poverty just means that you have to also get particularly creative when it comes to accessing certain types of resources that you wouldn't otherwise have, uh, that you would otherwise have had or have access to through money. What is the biggest block to learning and success is low self-esteem. The biggest block to learning and success is low self-esteem. And if you really take a moment to absorb that in, you'll realize that it is part of a lot of these different factors, but when you really look at it, it's the low self-esteem, right? Um, People with low self-esteem will approach the gatekeeping from their wounding, but they will also gatekeep, right? So they will not realize that the problem is bigger than them, and they won't realize that, you know, um, the low self-esteem actually leads people to act in ways that create gatekeeping and also prevent them from properly addressing gatekeeping. The low self-esteem uh, also is part of structural and systemic racism. How is that? Well, it comes again to the almost a similar thing, right? Like your reaction, how you approach the situation that you're put in which you suspect racism or you're being the target of microaggressions. Um, your response, you know, um, is super important, but also you need to realize that these structural and systemic racist microaggressions or overt um, actions by individuals are often aimed to bring down your self-esteem because the way that individuals are manipulated through racism is by controlling and manipulating the self-esteem of an individual, first and foremost. It is the reason why a lot of instructors and professors and individuals will work with people and coach them through really having a firm foundation of self, because that means that, no matter what happens, no matter what another person does, it has nothing um to do with like your core self. Mental health. Having extreme low self-esteem is part of like having mental health issues, but oftentimes it isn't like the biggest thing. There could be mental health issues for other number of different reasons. Um, Like people that are depressed are not always depressed because they have low self-esteem. Sometimes they're depressed because they're in mourning, or it's the same like idea why I myth bust the idea that, all heavy women or all heavy men have low self-esteem problems or have eating problems. Not necessarily. There's so many people who actually have genuine physical illnesses that make them gain weight. And it can have nothing to do with their self-esteem. So mental health sometimes, yes, a, a self-esteem is a factor, but not necessarily the reason why people are blocked from learning and success. Poverty, you know, there's a lot of people that struggle with their finances that have perfectly healthy self-esteem. So if you're tying the amount of money that you have in your bank to your self-esteem, that's something to deal with, like seriously address, because that is an incredibly dangerous and uh, personally, I think that's an incredibly dangerous way of like assessing your self-worth is through your bank account. You have so much more to offer the world that might not even be related to your bank account or even be related to how much you get paid. There's so many doctors in this world that are angels, that are worth everything, and they choose willingly to work and volunteer for organizations for free. They travel the world providing free healthcare. They hardly get paid, they hardly make any money, and yet they are worth, so much because they're giving their gift to the world. So the self-esteem, of a person should not be tied to what they're making, or whether they achieved like millionaire status at 25. I think that that's something that we need to like separate. Without a doubt, the biggest block to learning and success is low self-esteem for so many reasons. And it is one of the reasons why so many educators, even in K through 12, really aim to help students become self-learners. um, Self-efficacy is a huge part of gaining confidence or helping students gain confidence, helping students become more self-reliant, helping students to become independent problem solvers, critical thinkers that can solve the problems they come across on their own because they've already been taught ways of like solving those problems in the past, have been like trained and taught how to critically think about problems. Um, Ways of building someone's confidence and self-esteem is by working on creating an open mindset, because confidence equals open mindset. And when you have a closed mindset, you're less likely to actually capture the information. As it is, the average student only captures about 30% of the material they're exposed to. I want to repeat that one more time because it's incredibly crucial for people to understand. On average, the average student is only going to capture about 30% of what they're exposed to. This is why I frequently state that 95% of the work is on the student and only about 5% is on the actual instructor. Because if you want to go from 30% to 100% of the material, you have to do a lot of extra work on your own. You have to really have an open mindset and go out into the world, ask the questions to the information that you don't know, um, figure out what you don't know, find the solution to what you don't know, or find out the problem that you don't even know exists, right? Like that's all part of open mindset. And getting to that point of having an open mindset means that you're gonna come across a lot of situations in which you don't know the answer. There's a lot of uncertainty in those situations, and there are going to be moments in which you are going to be confronted with, like, maybe I'm not good enough, but you know, a healthy self-esteem helps an individual move past that. and gain confidence in the skills and the strategies to move past that. The other thing is an individual with a high self-esteem or a healthy sense of confidence is going to have more emotional resilience or resilience overall, meaning they're just going to be better equipped to handle the tough moments. So, all of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, the gatekeeping, the structural and systemic racism, the mental health, the generational trauma, poverty, et cetera, a lot of that becomes part of what an individual is able to build resilience against when they've gained confidence, when they've built their self efficacy to deal with certain problems and they've encountered those problems in the past. And once you kind of really move past that, you learn that your ability to learn and to achieve certain types of success, achieve your goals, really grows exponentially. And something else I want to add with the like 30% that students um, are able to capture is that on average, the average student um, generally has a really short attention span of anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. So, like for those, people learning, well, people wondering why they're not learning something, that's part of it. It's the 30%, it's your attention span might be, anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes, and you might be underexposing yourself or overexposing yourself to a particular issue or subject or topic or whatever it is. Um, and learning these sort of like uh, particular facts about learning helps. That's it for this video, right? Self-esteem is the biggest learning block, the biggest success block there is out there. And I think it's something that everyone should aim to work on, regardless of what their goals are. I think we focus on your self-esteem. Um, that's it. I would appreciate if you share, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I hope to see you next time. Bye.